Howdy, y'alls. Welcome back. It's me, Dr. Edwards, and wow, we're in week 8. This is kind of the culmination of our course. Everything should be really kind of coming together and stitching together. We've explored humans as a species, developing our ecological perspective. We've developed our evolutionary perspective, our cultural evolutionary perspective, and developed some good insights into human ecology. Now, all this really underscores that we currently live in a very complex, technologically driven, energy intensive, overpopulated, and interconnected world. Oof. And I know this can seem overly defeatist, but it's only really by understanding the choices that we make that we're able to make different choices. And this is actually a really great kind of avenue to explore the idea of change, development, globalization. I've mentioned before, I actually, way back in the day, I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and I was a natural resource management technical advisor for the Bafin Faunal Reserve in Mali, West Africa. And my job was to go tell people what they could and couldn't do in this faunal reserve. And needless to say, I had issues with that. Rather, I spent my time asking folks why they used things the way they did. But my point is that I was supposed to go tell people what they could and couldn't do. That's change, all right? And it's also how to say it. It's reflecting this Western perspective. Okay, that these species are to be conserved. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Excuse me, and I'm going to share a bit about my own research, which is actually all about globalization. I study wildlife use in Mali, and on the surface, based on dominant notions of globalization, which tends to suggest that the West dictates to the rest, all right, north to south, sort of core to periphery sort of modeling. And one would expect that other nations, communities, groups would adopt these Western conservation values. Well, some do, some don't. So why? Wildlife use in Mali gives some really good insights. Essentially, in a nutshell, Malians are playing both sides of the fence, and it's in their best interest to. On one hand, they sign international conservation agreements. They're a member of CITES and IUCN. These are two large international biodiversity conservation. One's a body of law, CITES. It's the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna. And then we also have IUCN, which is the International Union of Conservation of Nature, and they're one of the leading global authorities on species data, if you would. Right? They create this thing called the Red List, which gives a species status, its conservation status. You know, if it's not threatened, if it's vulnerable, if it's threatened, if it's endangered, things like that. So, kind of backing up here, because as a Peace Corps volunteer, I was told to go tell local folks what they could and could not do, which is really kind of this West dictates to the rest model, right? This core to periphery. The core is Western conservation values. The periphery is Malian wildlife or Malian resource users. And yeah, lots of folks, they did not like these Western conservation values. In fact, they manipulated them, and they did so for a lot of good reasons. And you can see this in two markets in the capital. One's called the Marabagayoro, which is all about traditional medicine. And then right next to it is this other market called the Artisana, and it's all about tourist goods. Right, so we're already kind of setting up that one is all local, right, and the other is more global. Now it's interesting because there's about 500 species of vertebrate fauna that are used between the two markets. Most of all those are reflected in the traditional medicine market. Right, you see a much wider variety of species used there. However, there's about 20 24, 25, if I remember right, that are regularly used in the tourist market to make tourist goods, like crocodile wallets, black cobra belts, Nile monitor briefcases, you name it. A lot of reptiles are actually used. Now, when you talk to folks in this tourist market about, like, well, these things are protected or threatened, or, what is being done to conserve these things, they get a little agitated, and rightfully so, because they'll turn around and tell you, well, you're the guys, Westerners, tourists, are the ones that want these things, right? That we have a value for them, and they're just serving that value. So it really kind of, this offers another unique glimpse into these really intricate relationships, these networks between different people in different places. And the upshot of this one is that, at least in the tourist market, these wildlife values that are being reflected in the various wildlife goods that are made are really all about serving Western demand. Right? And they said, well, if you guys stop wanting the stuff, we'll stop making the stuff. But they see ready niches, if you would, ways that they can readily adapt and use, strategies to meet various Western values, needs, and demands. One good example, one day I saw this guy, and he was making something I hadn't seen before. And I asked him, I'm like, well, what are you making? And he's like, watch bands. And he was making them out of, if I remember right, Savannah monitor skin. And I'm like, wow, okay, so why watch bands? And he points to all the tourists in the market, and he's like, y'all have watches. And this is a way that you all can display your values of wanting these things. You can wear them, and his insight was spot on. It was really incredible. And he was probably 16, 17, maybe 18 years old. He was an apprentice for one of the leather workers in the market. But this was his whole idea, that there was a demand, and he was taught to serve these demands through Western capitalistic models. So anyway, don't want to get too far off topic, but these relationships between different people in different places, really important to understand that technology plays a key role in that, in transmitting these values, how they're spread, how they're negotiated, right? And I want to stress that don't fall victim to some of the dominant notions of globalization, that it's the West to the rest, or North to the South, this core to periphery sort of model, right? Always remember that there is agency, human choice, right? And in fact, when we turn our critical gaze upon ourselves and our own resource use, right, it's that same agency that allows us to choose different, right? We can look back and look at our past choices and see the trade-offs and the costs that these have come with, and we can use our agency to choose different, right? And that's where we are. We're actually at this beginning of a new era, if you would, and we're focused on sustainability now. It's still taking off. We're not all the way in it yet. We're kind of at the starting point. But it's important to understand that is possible because we have this thing called agency, free choice, free will, and it's to serve our interests. We are seeing that our past choices have these particular costs, so we are now choosing different. Okay, it's no different than Mali and tourist market in Mali using certain resources because it's serving their needs, and their needs are very specific right now. They're an economically depressed country. Most folks live off less than $2 a day. When you're faced with that sort of reality, the value of a particular species is not that significant in comparison to being able to put food on the table, right? So yeah, just keep these concepts in mind that while one thing may be true for one person, it's not necessarily true for all people. All right. So that's where I'm going to leave this. Looking forward to your all's discussion post this week. I give actually some direction about what we want to talk about. Thinking about success and how it plays out in the contemporary world. But we also have significant barriers, right? Things like terrorism, inequality, globalization, climate change, economic instability, social unrest, environmental destruction, pollution. My whole example about wildlife use in Mali, that really touches on globalization, economic instability, and environmental destruction, right? All of those intimately connected in this lens of or perspective of globalization. So yeah, I want you to think of a problem that focuses on these issues in the modern world, right? And develop a good question that ties in our course material to it. All right. So that's where I'll leave this, and you guys have a great rest of your week. I'll see you in the discussion boards. Take care.